okay if Christians just pray for government? Should we just stop there?
No, you shouldn't. You need to pray for government, definitely, but you can't stop there. I think, really we're in a place in our country where we've never been closer to the brink of socialism. And socialism at its core is about replacing God with government and freedom with tyranny. And that's something we just can't ever let happen here. And, it's people of faith who need to get more involved so that they can push back against things that don't align with their values.
So let me ask you, in the book you mentioned one of my favorite quotes from John Adams, where he says our Constitution was written for a religious and moral people, that it's inadequate to the governing of any other. And so let me ask you about that. So religious and moral people have to be that fiber that kind of holds everything together.
Mm-hmm. I love what my friend Eamon Ross likes to say. If you want to see what politics looks like without Christians involved, just turn on your TV set. If we are not there to step in, then that void is going to get filled by somebody. And a lot of times it may be somebody that doesn't align with our values or may not be in it for the right reasons. So it's really a time where I think, now more than ever, we need to step up and get involved.
Terri, I just like the title, Running into Fire. Can you talk to us a little bit about the fire that is experienced when you've been working in government and just ways that you have seen God move? Because I think a lot of us were very curious about it. It's like, we see politicians and those working behind the scenes, but to really understand the warfare and the fight that you have to do in order to uphold the country.
Well, the reason I named the book that is because I was talking with a friend of mine who had run for Congress about the same time I did, and I asked him, why do you believe Christians shy away from being involved in politics? And he said, because they're afraid of it, because they think of it as being dirty and corrupt. And I said, well, okay, that's what I hear over and over as well. He said, but what they really need to be doing is thinking of it more like people who are in law enforcement or people who are firefighters, because they're trained to overcome those fears. And instead of running away from the burning building, they run right into it. So, that's exactly what we need to be like. We can't give in to fear. We're called to walk in faith. And in politics, like any other business, you're going to have good actors and bad actors. But there are good, honest people in politics. They just need more support and reinforcements. And politics is really a numbers game. And right now, if we're not even playing, we're not going to be, as successful. I think people don't realize that really it's a marketing campaign. It's a branding and marketing campaign. And that takes money. And it also takes people who many times are behind the scenes working and pulling the strings on a lot of the things that we see out in front and may not understand how that has affected our decisions. And so I think I was, really just trying to help people understand that sometimes the person who you see the most out in front, the person who has the most billboards or yard signs, may not be the best candidate. You need to do your homework. This is something that we need to treat like a job interview and not just a quick decision, because these are people that are making decisions that affect everything that touches our lives.
12.9 million people in Pennsylvania.
That's a lot. It's one of the bigger states here.
We get to cast our vote, that will rule over our state.
And we're one of those states that are the swing states. We're one of the ones that there's so many issues. I want to ask you about local politics, though. A fella in my church, he just was elected mayor of his local community. And he got accused of stealing an election. He got accused of, this is where votes are counted in hundreds, and his opponent said, well, you should be in prison, all this. Thankfully, he took his office and is working to build a nice government there. But how do Christians that aren't going to run for national office, how do they get involved locally?
Well, not everybody's called to the mountain of government, and that's okay. Not everybody's called to put your name on a ballot, but you don't get a pass. Just because you're not called to serve in it directly doesn't mean that you can't do things to support those who are, and that's what is so critical right now. I think that's what we've really been missing. I almost named this book Less Than 1%, and the reason for that is because that's the percentage of Americans who gave to political campaigns in the 2016 election cycle. Wow. So less than 1% of the population actually had skin in the game. And if you're a Christian and you feel called to run for office, where are you going to go for support? If you're not a multimillionaire and you're not willing to take millions of dollars from people who are probably going to want to own you once you get in office, you go to other like-minded believers and say, hey, I'm running, I share your values. If they look at you and say, I'm sorry, we just don't get involved in politics, where do you go? So this is a major disconnect, I believe, and that's why 64% of Americans identify as Christian. And so that's why this book was written as a call to action for the body of Christ, to say, we need to get more involved. And part of the way that you need to do that is not just voting at the ballot box. You need to vote with your wallet and your time and your influence.
Terry, you just said something that was just like hit my spirit, is that a lot of them, like, so they don't get owned. Can you just talk to us about that for a minute? Because I think we see the campaigns, we see it, but we don't understand that there's this whole ownership, and there's certain ways that politicians could be swayed left or right. And what does that really look like, so we have a better understanding? Because I think we're kind of blinded to it and don't really truly understand.
Sure. Well, I think it is varying degrees, but there are a lot of situations where if somebody gives you money before you are put in office, they're going to expect you to always, support things that they have as an agenda. So that's been happening forever in politics. But I think right now we're in a season where it's become more and more costly to run for office. Every election cycle, the cost keeps going higher and higher. And if you're going to get that kind of money, a lot of times you're going to have to be beholden to the people that give it to you. That's just common sense.
Yeah.
And yet that's not really the way we want to have our systems work, is it?
No, not at all. And another question I just have for you. So what are some of the biggest laws right now that are like on the line that we need to be aware of, and just how we're going to vote? Because I think a lot of times it's like you're reading the news or just different things. We don't really understand these are the laws that are getting passed. Is there something in particular right now that we need to be aware of? If we vote one way, something's going to go in and it's not going to be good for us.
I think, right now, a lot of the decisions that are being made are going to be affected by the midterms. So it's hard to say as far as how that's going to play out. It really comes down to voter turnout. There's some pretty major issues, immigration, all of the things happening right now with the economy. We're in a $30 trillion deficit right now. That's going to affect our future generations. We're saddling them with debt that is just overwhelming. So, a lot of the things that we see facing us will come down to the decision makers that we put in, that decision next week will affect. So that's why it's such a critical time to get out and vote in person, if at all possible.
Terry, for many years, it seemed like people of faith took this step back out of politics, almost like, just I'm going to keep to my church and my things, my spiritual things. And not that those were bad, but God calls us to more. The whole idea of the 7 mind molders or spheres of influence, or mountains as they've been called, the government is one of those. God has something to say to every sphere of life. Could you just speak to that whole idea?
Sure. I think you're right. Christians have, in a lot of ways, pulled back and felt like, oh gosh, that's just dirty, or that's just territory that we're going to kind of stay out of and stay in a safe zone. And yet, we're called to be salt and light. We're called to walk in faith, not fear. And courage breeds courage. And it's a time where those decisions cannot be relegated to people who may just be in it for the wrong reasons or selfish reasons. We all see politicians that we get discouraged by. And, that's the only way that that's going to be overcome. And like I said earlier, it's a numbers game, is if more people who are in it for the right reasons get involved.
I want to ask you about that, though. I want to ask you about that whole combat political. It seems like a combat zone. You've been involved in it. What's it like? What's it like to be inside the White House and see all this going on? What's it like to be in the campaign trail and be the focal point? A lot of us are like, I don't know if I really want to sign up for that.
Well, what God calls you to, He equips you for. Yeah. And so it's not something that you start off with right off the bat. You train and you get ready and you build into it. But it's like anything else. It can be amazing. Some days you're just like, this is the greatest thing in the world. And other days you're like, oh my gosh, this is so awful. But it just depends on what you are called to do. And if you are called to run for office, then God equips you to do that.
That's amazing. I love what you have in here about like how to take the next step, like an action step, and get started. And I thought it was going to be like pray, fast, and vote. But you keep going and going and get involved in the primaries and do your homework and give money and ask God if you're being called and recruit a good support team and get trained and get informed, go door to door, volunteer, as a poll worker, support political leaders. It's like we can have a voice here in what happens. Now, a lot of people are complaining about it. A lot of people are moaning about it, whining about it, but there's another like faith without works or corresponding actions is dead. What would you say to those today? We're 6 days out ahead of the election. What is our action step?
Well, first and foremost, you need to go vote. That's, a major thing. It's a privilege, and it's something that we have to really not take for granted, because there are so many countries around the world where they don't have the ability to make a difference and make change the way we do. But, beyond that, I think a lot of people wait until the last minute to think about what they're going to do with politics. And I always say, hey, do your homework. Try to get as much information on the candidates as you can. Really think and pray about that piece, because that's critical. Don't just wait until the day of the election and go to the ballot box to make that decision.
Should we just believe those 60-second, commercials that we're seeing? Should we just believe those, or should we do a little digging?
You need to do a little digging. This is a time where people, you can find out a lot of things on the internet or by talking to others that are like-minded, and there's no reason not to do that kind of homework. It's too critical of a decision.
Yeah.
It seems like a lot of times now, people don't even understand some of the danger that we're in. You mentioned socialism. Could you just speak? We just have about a minute and a half left. Could you just speak to why is that? That's a word. In the 50s, they would have been scared of that word, and now we're kind of more accepting of it. But what is the danger there?
Well, socialism has never worked. It's failed every time it's been put in place. You look at countries like Venezuela, where right now we have all of these people fleeing Venezuela to come here to escape the things that we are embracing. It's beyond me why this is something that we keep trying, because it doesn't work. We have a great system here in this country. We just need to appreciate what we've got and protect it. And I think that's, one of the biggest things that I really encourage in the book. I think a lot of our young people have confused socialism with social justice, and they're not the same thing at all.
What's one thing we need to pray for right now?
That God would give us the right leaders and give us wisdom on who to choose for this next decision that's coming up. We have a decision, and we all get a vote, and that's such an incredible honor, and we just can't take it lightly.